Good morning, everybody. This is Carrie Getz with another edition of our podcast. Today, I am super excited to be interviewing Nancy Novak. I've known Nancy for quite some time through Infrastructure Masons and some other work supporting women in the industry. She's currently the Senior VP of Construction for Compass Data Center. So construction is a little different avenue than we've talked about in some of these podcasts, but Nancy also does a ton of outreach for women in the industry. So we're really excited to have her. So welcome, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into this industry. I'm sure you didn't grow up thinking, I want to build data centers.
No, and the data center angle is a very fun story, but I'm going to start out just by talking about construction in general. I am one of four girls in my family, and my father was a semi-pro football player, Marine Corps sergeant, and worked as a general superintendent for, at the time, the largest firm in the world called Morris Knudsen, which you probably have heard of. But he had all girls, and we would spend a lot of time on job sites with him because he worked globally. So we would go out and work on summertime, which, by the way, is a great summer job because it was good money for us, and we just got really familiar with the construction sites. So I always say that he's the one who led me to the industry. Obviously, the first job I ever did, I did with him. It was tough because he's, a tough boss. But I just fell in love with the construction industry, and I literally out of high school, that's where I started, and that's where I stayed.
My first degree was in architectural design. I just love the way that, things come together and being able to start with an idea. And then, it's kind of like watching a kid grow up when you get to see it all done and complete at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, and I had to say, my dad did a lot of military work, so I spent a lot of time working on military bases, and we moved frequently. I mean, after I started my career, I've moved. The kids have counted 17 moves with kids in tow. So, but a lot of that was because I was a bit of a job chaser. And I do want to back up just a tiny bit, because after I got into the industry in the beginning, remember, at my age, there were hardly any women in the business, and there also really wasn't a normal program in college to do construction management. So it was a brand new area. And working with the government, I started out in quality control, where they allowed you to have certain years of experience in lieu of a degree. And then when that started to go away, I was forced to go back to school and earn a degree. And by that time, fortunately, construction management was a thing. And that's what I ended up doing.
Nice. Yeah, I think, some people start with degrees, some people don't, some people get their degrees later. And I know that there's been a big shift in this industry and a big push to do a lot of skills-based hiring. And that's part of the reason that we're talking to trades. I mean, realistically, if you go to a job site, if it weren't for the trades, none of us would have a job. I've said that before and I'll say it again. There's lots of paths, and school is, college is not in the works for everybody. And in a lot of cases, you can start and get a great job in this industry and have your college paid for.
Well, I mean, this is some fun facts here. I worked with Hensel Phelps for 20 years. We had men on the board who did not hold a college degree, and they were outstanding. The CEO domestically for Balfour Beatty does not have a 4-year degree. Our business, as you said, I mean, there's a lot of different paths to getting where you want to go, but time in the saddle, seeing the movie, watching things get built, learning from the trades, those are all extremely valuable. And in fact, I would even venture to say more valuable than a formal education. And honestly, the reason why most companies recruit in a formal environment is because they figure if I go after people with those types of degrees, they're at least interested in our business, right? So it narrows down the field to that point. I'm going to tell you, Carrie, like in Compass, we have a program that I'm really excited about, and it's to help women. And what we do is we go out and find our junior CMs. They could be women who have zero experience in construction, no exposure, and no education, and we just train them. And I'll let you know right now, I've had this going for about 1.5 years, and these women are rocking. They are loving their jobs. They are just doing a fantastic job for us. We could not be happier. So I'm excited to see how that evolves.
So let's spend a little time on that, and then we'll come back and you can talk about what Compass does. But I think that that's really something key. And I think HR in a lot of cases really needs to change their mindset. one of the things that I started looking up when I started doing this podcast and interviewing everybody, only 35% of women and 34% of men in the United States have a 4-year degree. And most
Right.
job applications start out with, you've got to have a 4-year degree. And then these systems just kick out anybody that doesn't. And so companies like what you guys are doing at Compass and some of the work through Infrastructure Masons and some of these women outreach, I think the biggest audience that needs to hear that in some cases is HR. I mean, I applaud what you're doing. I think it's awesome. And honestly, I would say that if you really invest in a person and invest in their future, they're super loyal employees. Whereas one of the complaints that I've heard multiple times is you hire a kid out of college with massive debt and there's no loyalty. As soon as they've worked there for a year or two, they're worth $10,000 more a year to somebody else and they're trying to pay off that debt and they bounce.
Yeah. And that's a way more common now than it ever had been in the past. But you're spot on. I mean, what it really takes to make it in our industry is passion and excitement and liking what you do and and being able to be nimble around that and wanting to continually learn. I mean, when I recruit, the one thing I always say, and I literally just got interviewed by another publication over this interesting viewpoint about the construction industry. And the reason why I think it's so awesome and people should probably put these lenses on is, you learn about everyone you build for. Okay. So I've done really cool jobs. If you build a hospital, you learn about healthcare in hospitals. If you build an airport, you learn how airports are run. If you build a museum, you understand how museums are curated and what goes on behind the scenes. And if you build a launch pad, which I have done, you learn all about space and launch vehicles. And it's just, if you're a learner and you want to keep learning, this is absolutely one of the best industries to be a part of. And that kind of passion and excitement is all it takes to be successful.
The whole point is just giving somebody a break, right?
True. And that's exactly that. You're right, because a lot of these young women that we're hiring, they never thought about going into this business. And so we reach out to them and say, would you be interested in giving it a shot? And it's great because, I mean, they're out there talking with all the tradespeople. They're learning so much. They're enjoying their job, doing such a good job, getting up on the equipment and trying it out and, asking really good questions. So it's just been fascinating, but a career that they never thought would be something that they would consider or be able to enter. And this, I'm talking about, more of the in the field, but office staff. And I know that we also want to talk about the trades because we need women to fix we need women desperately to help fix our trade shortage for sure.
We need women to fix a lot of things, but I digress. But that's a good point. I mean, there is some amazing artisanship that comes in the trades. And I think in this country, we've really done kind of a horrible job of supporting trades. A lot of the trade schools have closed. A lot of the 2-year programs have closed. I know Micro is doing a good bit of work, trying to bring some awareness back to that. But, 4-year college isn't there for everybody. And I was on a panel with a fellow from one of the big hyperscale data center, folks. And we were talking about this and it came up about building diversity. And I said, well, one thing we need to do is we need to stop requiring degrees from everybody because women make less than men. And if somebody has to leave and be a caregiver, it's more often than not going to be the woman that leaves because she makes less money. And, we really need to start investing in women and figuring out what they do. And, maybe she's got 4 years experience, but if she's got 4 years experience, that's to me a better employee than, like you said, somebody with a 4-year degree and no experience. And he looked
Right.
and he said, well, I don't think we need to cheapen our hiring process by looking that way. And I thought, what a narrow-minded view. I mean, everybody learns differently. And
the bottom line is, and this is, I don't know the age range of the person you're talking about, but honestly, Carrie, my dad didn't have a 4-year degree and he built some of the most amazing structures in some of the most faraway places. So I'm just saying, it's a faster route, and it does make us think. Well, at least something, maybe a little bit of math, and you understand something about our business, and you obviously care enough to go get a degree in it. That's where I leave it right there. So when you go recruit in those areas, then if they start and they learn from scratch once you hire them, once they get on board, then they find out usually if they like it. if they want to stay in it and if they're going to be good at it. So again, I agree with you as far as requiring that. Here's my honest to God take on how having to solve some of the talent shortage that we have. If we can solve, for all the reasons why people don't want to go into our business, for all of the inconveniences of having the elements on a construction site, the hostile environment, the silos of different responsibilities, the weaponization of contracts, the way the brute strength required to put work in place, and just if we can solve for those things, we'll have solved for the diversity and inclusion part, and vice versa. So what keeps people out of our business, frankly, is the fact that there's a lot of things that we need to fix. We need to change how we do business.
But, it's going to take more people with the foresight like you have to really do that, because, most jobs are filled through networking. And who do we network with? We hang out with, people that are like-minded, that do the same kind of stuff that we do. And that's not always
Right.
conducive to that change.
No, I totally agree with you. That does make it difficult. And this is what's interesting that I realized a few weeks ago. Since I talk about this all the time, and I'm constantly going to different organizations and having this discussion, I start to assume, like most humans, that this is very common knowledge. And it always shocks me to learn that it's not common knowledge at all. And when someone asks me things like, well, explain to me how diversity can add more to the bottom line, I'm kind of like, oh, well, okay, sure, and thinking that this is something that everybody should be aware of. But since I'm focused on it, because it's more, for me, it's more normal. It's normalized, right? So, but yeah, and I have to tell you, so I was going to talk about construction versus data centers. So you're right, Carrie. When I go to different conferences and I sit on panels, I am normally one of the only people who's in the actual construction industry versus, data center operations and all the other, supply chain that goes with data centers. So my data center experience is a little bit unique, and that is, I retired from Hensel Phelps when I was 47, and I took about 3.5 years off and did a lot of traveling. During that time frame, I went to conferences that were outside of our industry that were very prestigious, like the Wall Street Journal conferences or the Fortune Media conferences, and I tried to learn about diversity. And I just met as many people as I could who could give me insight. And then while I was retired, my company that I retired from asked me to come back in and help with some very large procurements. And when I did that on the Apple headquarters pursuit, Balfour Beatty was part of the joint venture team, and I met them, and we didn't get that job. And so, which was, I think, a blessing in disguise. But nonetheless, a year and a half later, I ran into the chief of enterprise for Balfour Beatty, and he asked me what I was doing. And I said, well, I kind of want to go back in the industry. I just don't want to run work, because running work takes everything out of me. And I have lots of other things I want to accomplish. So it was very serendipitous. They hired me as the national VP of operations to try to help them become one national firm, since they had acquired numerous firms over the past decade in the United States. And that was wonderful. I did that for about 3 years. And then during that time, I met Chris Crosby, because he was a national account. And we hit it off pretty well. But honestly, when I decided to exit again, I hadn't heard from Chris for probably 2 years. And when I made this announcement, he called me and said, I really want you to come help build my business. And I was like, okay. I said, well, first of all, I've never been fond of building data centers, because data centers really are hard on the trades. They're hard on the staff. They're always running triple shifts. They always want everything yesterday. And then the other part is, they're not that exciting, honestly. They're big, huge boxes that blow a bunch of air and have a bunch
They
of
are kind of
wires.
ugly.
Yeah, they're kind of ugly. There's not like the most thrilling thing to go build, in my, my humble opinion. And I said, and I don't know about, working for an owner would be different for me. But I went and talked with Chris, and he convinced me how he wanted to make some changes in the industry. And this is a perfect catalyst for us to go make those changes. So I was completely bought in. He offered me an equity position that was very, very nice. And I love working with him, because like I just said, not only does he want to change industry, he wants to make it more inclusive. He wants diversity of thought and diversity of talent and diversity of skill. And so he's given me a lot of rope to be able to talk about those things and learn more about it, and try to instill that into our company as we grow. and hopefully, bleed off into some of the clients that we build for as well. That's a short history.
Yeah, I've been on a few panels with Chris, and I got to say he's definitely one of the more insightful people. He doesn't think the old company line, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yes.
it-
Yeah, he's an outside the box thinker for sure.
so let's talk a little bit about, without doing a commercial, with about what Compass does and the types of data centers you build and where you go and that kind of thing, because I think it's important that everybody understand that data center jobs are not just in Virginia. They're not just in Silicon Valley. They're not just in Dallas, and especially with Edge, they're going to literally be everywhere.
Yes. Yeah, this is what I was going to say when how I had said earlier, when you build for certain industries, you learn about those industries. Well, the whole industry of data is absolutely fascinating. The structures might not be that exciting to look at, but the world of data is changing so rapidly, and it's so exciting to be plugged into that has fulfilled my curiosity quotient for what I'm doing now. But what Compass does is we have a lot of fun building data centers all over the nation, and right now we're in Canada as well, and our plan is to continue expanding. We have 3 primary prototype models, and since my boss is a James Bond fan, we named them after James Bond movies. So we have a Skyfall, we have a Thunderball, and we have a Moonraker, kind of
Too
small,
funny.
medium, and large. And what's great about them is all 3 prototype models can be, they're pretty much a kit of parts that can be site adapted and organized in a way that can suit, a client's need fairly easily, from a suit to build or build a suit. I'm sorry, that was, was one of my slips. But yeah, so it's
Pre-construction, post-construction, right?
yeah. So when we go in and we go to and someone says, "Well, I need a bigger office, or I need, something. I need to reconfigure something." It's not difficult for us to adapt to that in a very quick manner. But one of the strategic things that we do, without trying to be too much of a commercial, but I think this is great because it does also bring into the discussion the diversity and inclusion. We focus heavily on offsite manufacturing, which I know everyone says they do. I have probably personally toured 90% of the manufacturing plants across the nation that do mechanical, electrical, so I can kind of see hands-on where people are at with this. So we focus heavily on that. We have a strategy where we work, we have a huge campus in Arizona, one in Dallas, and one here in Virginia. And then we have a lot of the Skyfalls, in many different states around the nation. And what we do is we kind of stage our long lead items through this offsite manufacturing approach strategically, so that we can deliver a lot faster. So speed to market, we know it's important in a data center. And as I said earlier, I don't like how that sucks the life out of the trades and the staff. So this is ideal, because what this does is allows us to work a normal work week and basically just rock and roll and put these buildings up, and flip that switch much, much faster for a client.
If anybody goes out there and does a search for some of the videos out there for, data centers, and look at things like the piping and the electricals and just the artistry of making all that look neat and tidy, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is. And that's why, one of the things that, like I said, we focus on is whether it's prefab on site, everything from lift slabs to subcomponents, which we call interdisciplinary components on trapezes, to full on power centers off site. What we're trying to do is make it a safer work environment, a tidier work environment, a more efficient work environment, and then it would also bring better quality. So if we have a Moonraker and we have 4 large data halls, we'll take the last data hall after the shell is up, and that'll become our fabrication plant on site. So the tradespeople can work at waist level and not be on their knees, where it's more dangerous, and they can work together collaboratively in an interdisciplinary environment to be able to be smart about how we not just model things, but put everything to scale and then fabricate something so that it can go in a very smooth cadence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I would argue that having your input is probably a big chunk of that, right? So a different way of looking at things, a different mindset for how things get put together, and better conditions for people is not something that has historically been considered in this industry at all.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Like I said, I think a lot of firms, they kind of toy with it, but they don't normalize it. And so we're trying to normalize that. and become more productive in a manufacturing approach, on site, off site, and so on and so forth. The construction industry has been flatlined when it comes to efficiency and production for the past 3 decades, and so it's shameful, and it's I think it's something the industry has to change. And I'll be perfectly frank, our clients are looking to disrupt this, and if the construction industry doesn't want to figure out how to solve that, our clients will solve it for us. And so I keep telling, I go to offsite manufacturing conferences and things like that. I tell these, contractors that you have got to figure out how to normalize this in your business so that you can service these clients who just, the only thing keeping them from expanding is putting work in place. And trust me, they're not going to let anything keep them from expanding.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I mean, this industry as a whole is just growing so fast. We're really sort of at a brink where the status quo isn't getting it anymore. People they're wanting better accountability for power, and they don't want to have pass through power. They want to know where every little kilowatt's going, and they want to be better environmental stewards. And from a work life perspective, they want things to be built safer. They want people to be happier because attrition is ridiculously expensive. And
it is. That's a good point. It's a very good point. And, just having predictability is huge. And nowadays, since technology is so exponential, we have to embrace it even harder to try to figure out how to have more predictability so people can balance their lives, and clients can figure out, what their business models have to look like and deliver to their clients, right?
And we talk about predictability, right? So artificial intelligence is a huge part of that. And, one of the things that's been proven is that AI carries the bias of whoever codes it. So back to your whole diversity thing, it becomes extremely important as we start letting computers think for us to make sure that we have input from everyone.
Yes, this is something I know that Google's working on quite a lot, but it is fascinating because I went to a cognitive bias, forum that was talking about this artificial intelligence conundrum, and it is, there's both good and bad. I don't know if you've seen like Elon Musk, talk about it, but I've read quite a few books on it, and I'm excited to be alive while this is happening. It's a little daunting, but it's a train that no one's going to jump in front of. I mean, it's coming down those tracks, and you have to figure out how to embrace that. And to your point, if we're going to come up with better technologies that are more sustainable, more from an energy usage standpoint, or any other, eco-friendly way to build stuff, and also be able to, accommodate artificial intelligence which is a far denser way of processing data. So it's heat, it puts out a lot of heat. But if we want to get really technically able to manage that stuff, you're going to need the best of the best. You're going to need the best talent you can find in the world. And it's just crazy to leave half the population on the sidelines for that.
Well,
right?
Exactly. And we talk about 4-year degrees, right? So there's no diversity of thought if everybody learns the exact same thing.
No, and I love to talk about this because I like to have fun when I speak, and when I do different conferences, and I'm always like, this is just it. Like, you can't put on other people's lenses because we're human, right? I mean, so you have to have them in the room to see through their lenses. We only know what we've been taught and what we've experienced. And that's all the human brain can know. It can't know any more than that. So if you have a bunch of, white or Caucasian males, in a boardroom, and they really want to be innovative, and they want to try something new, each one of them, they might have some diversity when, like, which school they went to, or whether they were raised in the country or the city, or whether they have traveled around the world. And so they're all going to bring different, diversity of thought, but they're still all going to be, in that group that has been treated their entire life like a Caucasian male, which lends, and what's normal for a Caucasian male versus, what would be normal for a diverse male or female, right? So again, they can be great people, have the best of intentions, good-hearted, really, 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 really want to innovate. No way can they put on someone else's lenses unless that person's in the room sharing those thoughts.
And even a lot of the college curriculum follows the same exact, they use the same textbooks, they use the same teaching methodology. And so, when you hire these kids straight out of school, they've learned one way. And most businesses will tell you that even if you hire somebody straight out of school, you've got to retrain them anyway. And you've got to teach
I
them your way of doing things.
totally agree with that. Yeah, I
But that becomes
totally agree.
a big difference in the inclusion part, right? It's one thing to bring all these people to the table, but you really have to listen to them to be inclusive.
Well, that's another excellent point, Carrie. You know, inviting someone to the dance is one thing, but you know, getting on the dance floor is a whole nother thing. So yes, inclusive means, you know, decision making power, and you know, being able to contribute in a way that matters. So 100% agree with that.
You know, some of what you're doing, taking women that haven't really had that college experience, I think brings kind of an extra level of diversity, right? Because they're learning things on the job in a new way. And, you know, you can teach safety
Oh,
and
that's
some
right.
of the important stuff, but, you know, just being able to light up that light bulb and see what it shines on is such a cool concept.
No, very good point. Very, very excellent point, honestly. And I didn't even think about it. That's why I love doing these things, because I always learn a little bit. I get some nuggets out of every presentation and every interview I do. But you're absolutely right. The women who haven't been taught the same way by everyone else in the same curriculum they're learning this in a whole different approach, and I think it's going to be fantastic. And you know, I just think it is. It's different ways of learning are always good. My oldest daughter is a college professor, and she's always challenging her students, and she's mixing it up and starting with, you know, this one semester and starting with something different the next semester to see, you know, how the outcome is. So it's good.
Good professors do that for sure. You know, I'm certainly
Mhm.
not downplaying education. I think it has a role, but I definitely think if we're going to start solving some of these problems, we really have to start looking outside of that
Yeah,
curriculum.
you have a good point though, Carrie. I'm not saying, I mean, because my daughter is an English literature professor, so she's all about critical thinking and trying that stuff. But honestly, the curriculums have all been written in a certain way, and that's what's available and that's what's used. And I absolutely think it stymies us from going outside the box and trying to approach things and problems from a different angle. So it's all good. I mean, both, you know, you can't have one without the other, but both is better.
Oh, sure. That's really where a lot of the certifications come in play, because a lot of the kids, you know, coming straight out of school have to go get certified because they haven't really been taught the skills
Absolutely.
needed for a job anyway. And
100%. Absolutely. Yep.
I think we're really kind of looking at an era where HR needs to step up to the plate and start thinking outside the box. I'll give you a good example. I was talking to somebody just the other day, one of my mentees, that said that he was up for a job and the HR person could not get over the fact that he didn't have Oracle CRM experience. He had experience with 3 other CRM packages. And, you know,
Mm.
you never want to say that to somebody that writes CRM, but they basically all do the same thing, right? And,
Right.
but just couldn't get passed on because HR doesn't have that technical expertise to really stand out and do that.
Well,
And I think,
that's what I was going to say. I was going to say exactly that. It's like they sometimes don't understand really what is needed, because you know, the operational people or the people who are, you know, I mean, the front lines or whatever, they're looking for certain attributes of, you know, these employees that can learn on the fly, you know, look at things from different angles, understand the concept behind something, maybe not the exact software, but and I'll give you a good example. When we look at field engineering as an example, I remember back when I was in the field, you know, we used a program called Terra Model, and then it moved into like a software called Kogo, and you know, and they keep advancing these software products that can, you know, give us good details for layout and 3 dimensional dimensions and all that, or you know, just ways to do work. And my whole thing about that is every superintendent out there can't continually learn every software product, but they know how to use the software, apply the software, you know, delegate the duties that go along with that. But it is super hard in today's world to be to be an expert in every product, right?
sure.
So it's the attributes you're looking for.
You know,
You
that
have
brings
to
up a
have
point when you talk about delegation. A lot of that stuff and a lot of the tasks get delegated to people that may not have those 4-year degrees, right? That's really where the trades can come in play, and really where people have the opportunity. Because if you start out as a plumber in construction, first off, you're going to be making probably more money than I'm making, but but there's a lot of other jobs around you, you know, that become part of that frame. And one of the interviews that we did in this podcast, there was a study that was done and determined that most children decide what they're going to be when they grow up by the age of 7. That's their frame of reference for all the careers and what's in their possible path as they grow up.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I love this. I mean, to me, I'm a data person. I love data.
Right.
So, and I think it's bad. Here's the other thing I wanted to bring up about that, because women have only been in the workforce really in full, like in droves coming in around the 70s. So like we don't have that many decades of data to fall back on. But when you look at all these studies, like you're talking about, it's fascinating to see the data points of how, having that diversity and putting women in decision-making positions has really, correlated with, better ROI and, and better work environments. And I see this data and I think, gosh, there's the business case. Why is this so hard to do? Right?
Yeah. Well, if you don't surround yourself and you don't put anybody in your frame of reference that brings up diversity, to your point earlier, you don't really get it's a problem. If you and all your buddies are sitting around drinking beer talking about the company and nobody said, "Hey, how come the only female you have on the board is either in HR or finance?"
Yeah.
They don't
No,
get it.
and that's typical. That's typical. It's HR, finance normally, or marketing.
Oh yeah. Marketing.
And
Yep.
I mean, when I was with Balfour, I was the only, vice president level officer that was in operations. So that was a big deal for them. And I think that now there's zero. So I mean, here's the other thing I think is interesting is when you get to this point where like, oh, we got one at the table, or a lot of people just rely, kind of relax on their laurels, and you see the attitudes around like, well, if this is happening organically. I mean, my grandma couldn't go to school, my mom got a college degree, and I own a business. So see, it's all happening organically. But I'm here to tell you, it's not. That's not happening organically. I mean, we went through this hiccup the last 2 years of 5% of women are representing CEO Fortune 500 companies, right? Or CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And then it dropped down to 4.5%. And then companies grew and shrunk and did certain things, and it went back up to 5%. Women on boards, we had a 9-year trajectory of adding women to boards, and then we dropped, 2%. But it has to be intentional at this point if you ever want to really move that needle.
Yeah, that's actually, probably the key point is that it has to be intentional. It has to be a conscious decision to make a difference. In fact, I read just the other day that David Solomon, who is the CEO of Goldman Sachs, said that Goldman Sachs will no longer take a company public unless they have at least one diverse person on the board, with an emphasis on it being a woman. And he even went so far as to say that they had a vast network of women that they could help somebody find a woman to put on the board. But over the last 4 years and the studies that they've done, companies that had at least one woman on the board performed significantly better for the stockholders. This really just highlights the fact that diversity is so important for the market as a whole and the profitability of that company. I'm sure you can say the same thing, but I've been on some of these women's panels too, and it seems like dads are the most involved and the most engaged because they want a better world for their daughters.
Oh, you hit that on the head, Gary. I mean, that is when you were, one of your questions was like, what was some of my biggest surprises or takeaways when we sit on these panels? It's always the dads that are lining up going, what can I do? I have daughters. What am I going to do? And I'm not laughing about it, but it's kind of like the whole, the full circle thing. Because now it's personal, and they have to look at this from a personal perspective. I do also want to point out that I get asked quite a bit, like, why am I focused more on women and not all diversity? And I always tell people, well, women do represent all diversity. And I just figure if you can solve the problem for that group, which is somewhat obvious, you will have improved everything. So it's that whole, the tide rises all boats kind of thing.
Sure. Diversity is different to everybody, right? So diversity of thought is getting a young person's idea, getting a woman's idea, getting people of different ethnicities and backgrounds. And there's a whole thing that goes in there. But like you said, you can't solve it all at once. And that's the reason this podcast series is really kind of focused on 3 specific areas to try to help. I mean, a third of our workforce in this industry is going to retire within the next 5 years.
Yeah. And that's, wow, that's huge.
Isn't that scary?
That's huge.
Yeah.
Yes. I was going to use that word scary, but yes, it's huge.
Yeah. And so to the point about dad, what can I do to make a difference? You can put role models in place for your daughters to look up to. That's a heck of a start right there.
Yeah. And that is a big deal. Like, the other thing that, we kind of talk about a lot is the wage gap. And in construction, you don't see as much of that, especially in the trades, because it's mostly classified labor. But there's only 3% of the trades are women. So, you have that issue. And then where the big gap comes in the salaried positions is not so much in the wages as it is in the advancement. And the other part, when we go back to the organic part, if you can put women in the leadership positions where they're in the decision making roles, you will not just fill the pipeline, but you will start building that ladder to advance women into these companies. But that's key, and it can't just be one of them. There's strength in numbers. We need advocates, whether men or women, but we need advocates at the table. I strongly believe that advancing women is the most important thing. I mean, we already represent half the workforce. We're currently earning half the degrees, but yet we only earn, less than 10% of the wages globally. It's skewed.
It is. It's really a terrible thing. And I've seen a lot of support for women really helping other women. So like my company, that the charter is 50% of the employees will be female and 50% of all partner referrals will go to women or diversely owned companies. Because, there's a lot of people that do lip service. You talk to people all the time, and they're like, well, we tried to hire a woman, but it got difficult. And so we didn't. And it's like, well, pay a relocation fee or let somebody work remotely. I mean, with technology today, there's no reason that somebody has to be up under your nose all the time. In some jobs, in a lot of jobs, you can support that remote workforce.
That's one of the things, Carrie, that's kind of kept our industry from like really embracing that, the changing how they do business, because they say, well, we have to go build jobs. You have to be there. You have to be present for it to happen. But that's why I'm like, well, okay. But there's a lot of things we do where we sit in front of our computers, and we could be home doing that. There's lots of things we do from a design standpoint and a management standpoint that are definitely remote opportunities. And then there's the massive component of offsite manufacturing, which is really that has to get normalized in our business in order for us to improve. And that allows you to have a controlled environment with you can put a daycare on site. It can be 9 to 5 type of a job. And that's really where I see now as I tour the nation, where there's a lot of emphasis, but we're a bit behind the curve. And there's one or two companies that have gotten ahead of the game and invested heavily early, and they're bursting at the seams right now. The ones that are just getting caught up, yeah, they're looking for work, and they'll get it. So I feel very optimistic about that happening. But changing our industry, instead of asking women to change or asking diverse employees to change, let's change how we do business, and let's normalize that change. And then let's also be neutral when it comes to, family leave and, giving people benefits, so that women in particular, when they get hired on, aren't, the back of someone's systemic brain, they're thinking, oh gosh, if you go have a kid, you're going to leave me for a few months and I might not get you back. Well, let's neutralize that, and let's allow both men and women to leave when they have children or have needs, family needs like that. So that way, in the back of whoever's hiring, this person's mind, they have that risk no matter who they hire, right?
Right. Well, and it is, it's kind of a catch-22. And I definitely agree that fathers need to be able to, take time off and for life events. And some of that's protected, but it's not protected with pay. So,
well, this is what's, I think, fascinating. So I stay in touch with a lot of the leaders, in the construction industry. And I was just talking with the VP of not business development, learning and development with Balfour Beatty. And she told me that they did a study about what it would take to do this neutralized policy where they could let people go and, take paid time off. And she said, well, we actually studied like how many people would be using this policy and at what times. And we kind of were conservative about it. It was pennies compared to the big picture, compared to their overall overhead. Now, they're a big company. So I'm sure, like, this is why most rules are, if you have less than 50 people, that might put a big dent in your budget, and you have to think about that. But for the large companies, this is a huge benefit that will help women immensely, and will also help them not have that attrition that you mentioned earlier that is so costly.
Well, and you talk about benefits. There's a lot of companies that will pay for your college, but they won't hire anybody that doesn't have a 4-year degree.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, that's a good one.
Um, but it very much is, an organic thing. And just being able to have these discussions and bring it to light, if we can just get the right people to listen, it is a quality of life. And like we talked about, the cost of turnover versus the cost of taking care of an employee that is on your payroll already it's so much cheaper just to take care of that employee. I saw a study not long ago that was like, I want to say that they had determined the cost of this benefit was going to be potentially $20,000 per employee over lifetime, but one employee turning over was $150,000.
Oh yeah, I did a study on that when I was with Pencil Phelps, and we figured out that when you look at the investment in the training, and over years, it got bigger, but for a management level, I mean, it got up to over $300,000 that you were losing through that attrition. It was huge, and as necessity is the mother of invention, right? So we want to get more innovative, we want to get better, we want to get more efficient, and that's why I'm looking at the perfect storm of demand right now in our business. And I'm like, so we have this necessity to bring in more talent. And as we all know, the statistics are showing us that, a third are going to retire and we don't have a big, a pipeline behind us here. So there's this necessity, and shame on us if we don't take advantage of that to really disrupt our business and make it better.
And you talk about not just the cost of attrition, but a lot of intellectual property leaves when somebody leaves too, because you can't erase somebody's brain just because they left your company. And
yeah. It's hard. It's intangible. It's hard to even quantify that, right?
People say, well, so-and-so's under a non-compete, but realistically, non-competes are almost impossible to enforce because there's no judge out there that's going to tell somebody they can't feed their family. Now, you can control like what customers they go into, but in order to enforce, you got to take your customers to court too. So, that's not litigating a solution is not an actual solution.
No, I agree. That's another one of those, customary things that we do. But I have to say that for sure, like you said, that intellectual property, not only is it you lose that person who has that is really hard to quantify, but then they go contribute to a competitor with it. So it's really hard to wrap your arms around what the loss is for attrition, but we all know attrition costs money, and nowadays it's more normal for people to change places, especially in the tech world, especially.
I did an article recently for one of the industry publications, and the attrition for women in this industry is 67%, which is
wow.
Horrible. Yes, that's tech as a whole. And of that 67% that leave, the number that leave the industry completely, where you just lose all of that talent, all of that, training, all of that input, is the majority of those women. Like when they leave, they're just done. Because, and a lot of it is, people talk about work-life balance, which I'm just going to say I think is non-existent. But, you just have to figure out how to manage that. But, if we're going to attract people or try to attract people to the industry and then make it so bad that they just like leave it as a whole, we really have a lot of work to do, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of, when you see the tech industry saying, come work for us, and, when they're trying super hard, spending a lot of money trying to figure this out. There was this one meme in a gymnasium where they had one of the tech firms had a sign up that said, come join us, we're, blah, 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 all the good things about our company. And people had taken ink pens and written on this advertisement, change your business, change how you do business, and we'll come join you, And again, I always look at that, and I know in construction in particular, the attitude has always been, this is a man's world and you're going to put up with our, stuff. Right. And I mean, I was one that had to kind of buy into that. Like, oh, this is very inconvenient. I don't know how to solve the problem. I don't know. And I finally came to the realization that we need to, as an industry, say, let's change how we do business. Let's not try to change the people we're trying to hire.
That's a funny point you bring up. I was on a women's panel with a girl that does construction for one of the big hyperscalers. And, she brought up just the condition of restrooms on a construction site. And she was really proud that was her pet project to have decent restrooms at a construction site and not have to share those.
Well, I mean, that's our policy too. I mean, we've been kind of, actually, that's a huge one when it comes to making a woman feel welcome on a project. That you have your own locking door, porta john that has running water in it, and it's clean, and it's that kind of thing. I mean, there's nothing worse than than having women show up to a job site, especially in the trades, and they don't have their own facilities. That's not an inviting atmosphere at all. Policy, I don't care even if there's no women on the workforce, we always will have facilities for both genders. Well, and I also think that companies need to start thinking of the environment as a safety concern. So every construction company and every client that we work with is very, very, very concerned about safety, as they should be. Our industry has gotten a lot safer over the years, but we still always have a long way to go. My attitude is all accidents are preventable, and there's just lots of programs that are effective but hard to enforce in our industry. And when you look at a hostile environment where even if it's a small minority of men who aren't embracing a female employee, because I have to say, Terry, I mean, with our young women that are out there, they the industry has changed to the point where these men are very respectful for the most part, and they are the ones that we deal with, and they're fun to work with, and my husband's a tradesman, and he's the most respectful person I know. I'm not ever going to put down tradesmen as being disrespectful, but the environment can absolutely lead to the good old boys networking and the discussions and then harassment, which part of me, wonders how. I mean, I'm removed from it now, but I don't want to undermine the fact that it still occurs and it's still very important.
Actually, that was one of the number one reasons cited for women leaving tech was harassment.
Yeah, and so this is something. It's not as explicit as it used to be, and that's why I talk about implicit biases. Which, by the way, implicit biases are something everyone has, and most of the time they are, people have these biases and they make decisions with good intentions, not bad intentions. But those biases also hurt us, and they can be harassing in a way. And sometimes, there is explicit harassment, right? I mean, I know that still exists, and it still needs to be addressed. It's a safety concern, and we need to start looking at, understanding how to make it a safe environment, emotionally, physically, and all of those things.
Yeah, people do stupid things when they're upset.
Yes, they do. Yeah, so it's it's still like the tech world. Women are a minority, both in leadership and even in just the masses. Construction it's quite dismal, actually. Less than 10% of the entire construction world is women. Less than 0.5% get to a top executive position in operations. And, as we said earlier, less than 3% are in the trade. So it's down there.
Yeah. And, to all those dads out there that are listening, if you want to make a difference, give your daughters women role models to look up to. I mean, put it in their frame of reference that these jobs are even a possibility for them.
Yes. And it's a great industry, by the way. I think, like I said, data is fascinating and it's changing the world. It's the new currency. I mean, it always kind of has been the currency of the world, but how we use it, apply it, and, and change the way we, interact with each other and with the earth is just absolutely astounding. So data is great. The tech world is, it's here to stay. And then construction is a fantastic career. It's exciting. You're never bored. It's literally one of the most exciting jobs you can have, especially if you're a person who likes to continuously learn.
I would say that for this industry kind of as a whole.
Yep. I totally agree.
Well, we are butting up close to the end of our time, but do you want to leave any parting thoughts with folks?
Well, I mean, I feel like we kind of bounced around a little bit, so I'm hoping that there was, a fairly concise message for everyone who took the time to listen. But I do want to say again that, I encourage anyone who's listening to be an advocate for those who are in the industry and for, putting on some different lenses when it comes to looking at what diversity means and also what inclusion means. And then if you're in a company meeting and you hear one of your female counterparts make a comment, please amplify that for them and help encourage the successes and basically the accomplishments of your employees that are not always being touched with the golden wand. Does that make sense?
It does. You bring up a good point. As women, we're not really told and taught to toot our own horn
Mm-hmm.
compared to some of the guys that do a much better job of that. And I think it's just a cultural thing. We're just not really raised to do that. And certainly having folks that can advocate and really sponsor for you it makes a huge difference.
Huge, very huge. So those are things, and I know this is what happens when we sit on panels and I do keynotes. Is I have men saying, "What can I do to help?" And that's one of the things that is super, super helpful.
Yeah. So if you guys get a chance to hear Nancy on any of her panels, I know she bounces around on a lot of those just like I do. She is, she puts together a good panel and it's always insightful. And Nancy, I really, really appreciate your time today. I think there's been some great content here. And for those of you that are listening, we look forward to having you on the next edition of our podcast series. Thanks again, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Carrie. It's my pleasure.